Yeah, we thought it'd be good in this call today to share some of the things we've learned from doing security audits from schools. We've done a lot of security audits now on Google Workspace. So we thought this would be a good opportunity to feedback some of the things we've learned from doing these and the top issues we find on school domains. But just quickly, just to overview our security audit process and what we actually do there. So every audit starts off with a discovery call where we get to talk to you and learn a bit more about your digital environment and your Google domain and what you want to get out of that audit. And then we would review all of your admin console settings. We look at about 200 to 300 different settings covering all aspects of your admin console. And then we put out into a really comprehensive report for you, detailing what we found, our recommendations, and yeah, lots more details too. So that's the process we go through. This is some of the top things we find. So starting with admin account security. And this is one of the key things. You've got to ensure your super admin accounts, who have got full access to every setting, every drive file, every Gmail message on your domain. It's really important to make sure these accounts are as secure as possible. And the first thing we look at here is, are admins using two-step verification? That's obviously a really important thing to do, and not just for your admin account you're using, but also for those service accounts you've created, which are also super admins. Important, those are using two-step verification as well. Don't use or don't share admin accounts. Really important to have named individual admin accounts, so that then individuals are accountable for the changes they're making on the admin console, and you can see those changes and who made those in the audit logs. So don't share accounts, and also have a separate admin account from your normal day-to-day account. So you've got your staff account for sending emails, browsing the web, and using third-party apps, and you've got a completely separate super admin account for doing admin console related tasks. That's quite a common issue we find, so really important to split up those two roles. Quite often we see too many super admins. Did one domain once where I think there were about 20 to 30 super admins on that domain, which of course made tracking who was changing what really difficult. So do make use of those delegated admin roles and be very specific in the privileges that you're delegating. Oh, and one last thing here on admin account security is don't sync your admin accounts with your local directory. Ensure that they're just created in the admin console. That's just so that if your local directory ever becomes compromised, then attackers can't access your Google admin console. So don't ever sync those accounts. User provisioning is something we look at, and here we're looking for things like ensuring that this process is automated. Automating provisioning processes means there's less mistakes, it reduces IT team workload, and it ensures that accounts are set up timely, but also disabled and suspended in a timely manner as well. So one thing we do find quite often is students or staff who have left the school, but their account may still be active. So what I'd recommend here is having a suspended users OU, so that when a student leaves a school or a member of staff leaves a school, that change is detected in the MIS and that gets synced up to Google. They get moved into a separate OU where the account gets suspended, sharing stops, and other Google services get turned off. That's really important. So number 3 on our list is two-step verification and ensuring you have strong passwords set for your users. So we recommend that any staff member accessing sensitive data is using two-step verification. And as we heard from James and Nicole earlier, it's now much easier for staff to enroll different two-step verification methods than it used to be. So that's really important. But also in your password policy in the admin console, go and have a look and just make sure you've got the box ticked for strong passwords. And that ensures that users aren't using common guessable passwords, and making sure that they're unique passwords and they're meeting password strength requirements. And you can actually monitor this on your domain. If you go into the reports and user reports and go to security, that will give you a snapshot of how strong everyone's passwords are, and it will highlight any users with weak passwords. So do make use of that report as well. So number 4 on our list is complex console structures. So yeah, I've seen a real range of different structures here. Some are very elegant, easy to navigate and apply policies to. Others sometimes have OUs numbering in like 300 to 400 OUs, which makes it very complex to navigate that structure, but also making sure you can accurately apply security policies to your different OUs in your console. So what I generally recommend is at the top level, have OUs for staff, students, maybe devices, guests, maybe an OU for your admins, but then break out those OUs by year group for students. Staff, you might want to break up to teaching staff and support staff, but beyond that, I would look to use groups and security groups to apply other policies. So I always like to keep quite a lean OU structure to make it easy to navigate and easier to apply policies consistently. So otherwise, if you've got a lot of OUs and you've got to do the same policy change when you want to change something across multiple OUs, there's more chances of mistakes happening and that not being done consistently. Okay, on to some Gmail things now. So the key thing on Gmail is just making sure you've got your DNS records configured correctly. So of course you want to make sure your MX records are set up properly so you can actually deliver messages, but also make sure, have you created an SPF record to authenticate your messages and prevent spoofing? Likewise, DKIM, another way of authenticating messages, helping prevent spoofing and spam, but also making sure you've got a DMARC record created to enforce those settings. And quite often we see a DMARC record created, but the policy has been set to none. So do look at upping that policy to either quarantine or reject messages, so that schools trying to spoof your domain, those messages will then get either rejected or sent to the user spam folder. So that's a really important thing to check and look at. And you can check that using tools like Google MX Toolbox or MX Toolbox. If you just search that in the in Google search, do that and type in your domain name, it will really quickly tell you whether your records are up to date and working properly and if there's any issues there. So that's Google MX Toolbox. Also in Gmail's got some really advanced safety features built in, things which will help prevent phishing and malware, which will ensure that no users are being spoofed on your domain, so you don't have people outside your domain trying to pretend to be someone inside your domain. So really important to turn on those Gmail safety settings. Security Sandbox is an Education Plus feature, which is really good at scanning incoming attachments for things like ransomware and zero-day exploits, things which normal virus checkers on desktops might miss. That's just a single tick box in Education Plus, so really easy to set up and configure. Also, what I find is sometimes maybe there's been an issue in the past when some messages weren't coming in. So as part of that troubleshooting process, someone's turned off that option, but then they forget to turn it back on again. I see that all the time. So do make sure if you are troubleshooting something, turn those options back on and put a proper workaround in place and find out the root cause of that, rather than just turning off the whole security option. That's a really important thing to do. Drive sharing settings. So we always look to see how many files are being shared externally and what types of files are being shared. And one important thing here is really around shared drives, because people, teachers, staff, admins on the domain, and they see shared drives as somewhere to keep all of your important sensitive data. But quite often we're finding that these shared drives are being shared outside of the school. So really important to audit your shared drive settings. You might want to create an activity rule so you get notified when shared drives get shared outside, or you could utilize trust rules, which are ways of applying a rule to different OUs, and OUs can contain shared drives. And then you can limit your shared drives by default to internal only, and have a separate OU for those shared drives which you do want to share outside the school. And also just things like, students can, for instance, publish content to the internet, and that could be a Google site or a Google Doc, and have a publicly available website they're running, nothing to do with the school, but hosted at the school and being shared publicly. So really important to check your student sharing settings as well and make sure that's what they need to be. Google Groups. So here on Google Groups, common things we find are groups which schools are expecting to be private are actually being shared publicly. So really important to check those settings. That's just a single tick box you can check in your group settings in the admin console, so you can stop all public sharing of groups. And also just making sure your overall sharing options and access settings for groups are configured the way you want. So quite often we find groups which perhaps should be staff only, but students can actually browse and see topics which are posts being posted to these groups. So important to make sure the access levels are set properly. And you can set defaults here as well in the admin console, so that when a new group does get created, but only the members of that group can see the contents of that group and not people outside of that group. The last thing on groups is just restricting group creation to admins only, so that staff and students can't set up their own Google groups. Okay, we're almost at the end now. So third-party app usage, obviously this is a hot topic last year when Google changed how third-party apps behave for under 18s. That's now much more controlled and restricted, but it's still important to also audit the third-party apps that your staff might be using as well. So here we're looking for things like, are you restricting access to the Drive and Gmail, which can often include sensitive data? We really highly recommend restricting access to those services so that apps must be fully trusted. And it's important just to regularly audit the apps which your staff are using. I was working with a school recently who found that their staff were using a new AI app which was requesting access to their Google Drive. And when we looked into that a bit further, the app's usage policy was quite open in terms of what it's doing with that data it's collecting from Drive. So really important to just make sure the apps that your staff are using are needed for the school as an education purpose for that, and it is of course compliant with your local data regulations. So do have a look at that. And the last one here is around Chrome device management. So many of the schools we support are using Chromebooks, which are probably one of the most secure devices out there. Chromebooks have never been infected by ransomware, but there's still extra things you can do in your Chromebooks to make them even more secure. So things like ensuring all of your Chromebooks are updating regularly to the latest version and not restricted to an older version or not being updated at all. So do make sure your updates are happening. Restricting sign-in to only school accounts so that students and staff aren't using their personal Gmail accounts on school devices. Particularly for students, ensuring you've got proper browser restrictions in place. So things like, have you disabled incognito mode? Is safe search enforced? Are you allowing students access to the developer tools, which can of course be used to modify extensions which are running, which can be a problem if you're using an extension to filter your web traffic. So do check out those settings. And also there's extra data protection options you can use within Chrome. So things like disabling external drives, really important for staff so that staff aren't downloading sensitive data onto a USB key and then losing that. And there's other data protection settings there to look at. So that's a quick whirlwind tour of all the top things we look at in security audits and what we've found. This is being recorded. I'll share the slide deck as well if that's useful to you. And if you do want an audit, then do get in touch. It normally takes about a week to 2 weeks. It's a really deep dive and it's a very practical audit. We're not just looking at policies, we're actually reviewing how things are configured in the admin console and what's actually happening on your domain. And we give you a really comprehensive Google Doc and sheet at the end with all our recommendations, which you can use to track that. But it's also a good training opportunity because we go into every area of the admin console and it's a great opportunity to upskill yourself as part of that process as well.